way, familiar with the work of Zaha Hadid, but I think on the other hand, it is the kind of work that's still waiting to be written about, to be discussed. Probably many of you are familiar with one of the topics that really concerned the architects of the modern movement after the war during the 1940s and so on, where they started to write about the issue of new monumentality, where they were really concerned about what is to happen to modern architecture when it really when it wants to go beyond the discussion of housing, when it really addresses the question of public architecture, civic architecture, and so on. And there was a great deal of discussion about this issue of the monument, new monumentality, as they called it. I think it's debatable the kind of successes that modernist architects had, but I think we might look at some of the work of Zaha as really some of the best exemplars of this research, of this investigation about the relationship between architecture and monumentality. I think in that sense, for example, her work is very different from some of her colleagues who are part of the OMA and so on, and maybe that's something that we might discuss at the end of the lecture. I think at the same time, she has also, in many of her urban projects, digressed from the kind of urbanism that the modern movement was involved with, what she calls sometimes, I think, tic-tacs or this kind of confetti. It is also a relationship to urbanism that really addresses the idea of the fragment, the idea of the infill, the tic-tic, yes, tic-tic, tic-tac, tic-tac-talk, I don't know. There are many, many versions of this idea of the relationship between the small fragment and its spreading of the confetti on urbanism, which I think also speaks of a very different approach, for example, to compare to the notion of the estate or the single block, which already speaks of a relationship to certain existing urban conditions. And I think that's, and one could really go on. Zaha is here, and I'm sure it's going to be quite a serious lecture, so I don't want to give another lecture beforehand. But I think what really is very important is that throughout her work and her projects, through her drawings, through her buildings, she's really used these to make very specific explorations, to look at the idea of architectural projects from a multiplicity of points of view. And I think, for example, her use of architectural drawings as a method of investigation is something that still needs to be, I think, discussed and analyzed. Equally, I know that she's not very fond of nature, as she keeps saying, but I'm sure she's coming around to it a little bit. But, for example, her researches into the relationship between architecture and landscape, going back to projects like the Hong Kong Peak, are very interesting in terms of what in the early 80s she was really doing in terms of exploring that connection between architecture and landscape. And I'm sure you all know that over the years she's been incredibly supportive of the school as a teacher. More recently, we had the pleasure of coordinating the workshop in Hong Kong, and of course she's been an important part of the AA 150 auction that was organized by Doris Sachi, and I hope that her support of the AA continues into the future. Would you please join me in welcoming Zaha Hadid?
Mohsen, thank you. My relationship with Mohsen is that I've always been nasty to him, and he's always been very nice to me. So it's a consistent relationship. As for these sausages which were in the soft room, they were soft, so that we can all roll over them together. It was a moment of the AA when the indulgence and kind of semi-sexuality was at its highest. And also, coming on the way here, I was trying to think of why 25. There was a thing which was called something like Diary of a Building, which was that the student of the AA second and third year was sent to the most horrible offices in London to have a grip of reality. which made sure that your revulsion of that reality is permanent, which means that you would never want to ever again be part of that world. And whether this my endeavor to kind of really try to explore other territories being successful or not, I'm still waiting. But it was a really deliberate act after I finished school that I will not pursue a so-called between brackets a conventional career, in the sense that I did not want to go to an office and learn how to do mansard roofs and detailed plumbing and stuff like that. Not that I am in any way belittling that aspect of practice, but it was a deliberate, very deliberate. So there are you picking on the chair. You mean I can ask other people to come from upstairs to downstairs who are shriveling in the terrace? Can I have the lights off, please? This is a rather long talk, so all of you who want to go to the toilet, want to make mobile phone calls, can do them right now. It's the AA is like Mexico City, where where every student have a mobile phone, so that they can get in touch with their beloved ones, and coordinate other appointments, which obviously only with studying. Anyway, someone asked Patrick Schumacher why I'm so down on students, and that was my down on students was really not a permanent down. It was a down 5 years ago, which was my critique of the whole issue of education and the revulsion by the teaching body and the student body to actually address real issues which could become interesting issues. So because of my talk today, I decided to really dig back into my slides and also talk about work which was done in connection with the school when I was teaching here. I think it's important to really also say that when I was teaching here, it was also a very important aspect of the work as tutors of the AA that we actually also did other work outside the school. That it was therefore the teaching was not only, Marcel is going to kill me. I know he's already giving me dirty looks, but that it's very important that the staff here in kind of really get involved with other stuff. So it was these two kind of parallels between the world of teaching and the world of not practice. I hate the word practice, sorry Moisen. I really do hope, because it sounds like a dentist practicing, that these two worlds of trying to kind of really implement ideas and develop them and teaching could be run in parallel, but that in no way your ego is really reliant on your success as a teacher. And therefore, it was important for me to kind of really begin to start also, really explain, when we started doing now there are other words for tick-tick, like swarms and stuff like that, but and tick-tick, the name tick-tick really deteriorated over the period of time, so I wouldn't like to explain its current meaning. But it has been used in a kind of, it has been bastardized as a word to say. I show also this, I always show this drawing because it is seminal in the sense that it is a drawing of what the world, and that it had a variety of significance for me. One which is at the time, which is sort of really kind of gathered together on one segment of the world, a series of products which were shown at the AA, which was in 1983. So there was like a drawing as a catalog of many, many projects, but also the intention was we have to prepare the kind of the surface of the world for kind of really taking on new ideas which were still kind of at this point in time still kind of hovering over this plan. What is interesting about it now is that after 15 years or 13 years of this, but what has become interesting for me is that the exploration of the surface of the world became, after 13 years, really the product itself. What I mean to say is that what started as an exploration in terms of projection, and also how you inject kind of new life into these segments of the world, became eventually the idea of the surface becomes the project. And in a sense, these projections really, this is I have to say, long before Form Z was invented. This is the mother of Form Z. And so this kind of really, and in a way they do the same thing. It was this three-dimensional exploration into what could become a kind of a project, become really the projection, idea of projection, the idea of spatial kind of manipulation, and how this could really begin to manifest itself on the so-called kind of earthly quality of the spirit. So there are a variety of products with Millennium Tectonic, which was done as in my fourth year. As this is also the tectonic becomes really the kind of the tick enhancer, and the Irish Prime Minister's house, and the peak on the edge of the horizon, tangential to the world. So the idea that their preoccupations also were just developing certain kind of really hierarchy in terms of, or non-hierarchy in terms of organization on the ground, which creates a degree of freedom, of liberty, and also could also imply that the buildings are so light, they're also non-gravitational, implies a degree of fluidity on the ground, which is no longer adhering to the idea of the kind of grid or the idea of kind of orthogonal kind of life. The Millennium Tectonic, which was given to us as a second-year project or fourth-year project, and the idea was that this is a kind of the intention when we started off is that investigating the implication how to inject supranatism into architecture, that it was an art movement which would yes to be tested as a kind of tectonic, as an architectural kind of condition, and that the intention was that if you give it a location, you invade it with a program, give it a scale, it could become an architecture. And once doing that, we realized that the kind of rules which you apply to this kind of project internally have to be of a different kind of nature, a different kind of order that which you would impose on other things. So the idea of this building, which has its on a top layer water, the condition of dirty water vis-a-vis clean water, and implying a degree of fragmentary nature on the way the interior is captured in terms of almost like looking at a fragment of the cosmos and kind of framed within the frames of the building. So when we began to look at the kind of really the idea of, like, an example of the cores, how this could be no longer a battery of cores, but a fragmented cores, the idea of organization internally, which becomes much more fluid and no longer, and the idea of how eventually structure becomes important and enabling the spatial kind of really exploration to take place. The Irish has one of the early studies of how one can begin to kind of really connect between nature and architecture. And some very, very early studies of how this idea of kind of a captured chaos within the walled garden which existed in Dublin and Phoenix Park, how this could really begin to kind of really imply there. Also the beginning of the drawing, which was seen as an X-ray, this is another drawing of a particular floor plan. This will resurface much later in many work. There's an X-ray of many floors pushed together. So people usually look at this and say, this is not a plan, this is not a plan, it's an X-ray of a plan, or a series of plan compressed on the same thing. I haven't shown these slides for maybe 10 years. So the tennis court, of course, was a major contentious piece in 1979, implying that tennis could become a different kind of game. And one must say at the time, why not? But it implied also the forces which are imposed on what the drawing began to show is that not only the existing context or what was seen, but also as an X-ray drawing began to show certain forces which operate on the kind of surfaces which were used by people or players in this case. So this kind of bulging planet, and also the idea that one begin to kind of really invade the surface of the earth with the different things. The Dutch House of Parliament, which is the project which I did with OMA, with the Roman Elia in 1978, which was almost 19 years ago. And the edge here, as you see, the Eaton Place and interior in London. This is an interesting condition which was moving from doing rather kind of really fluid, large kind of mass products to kind of compressing them into a very small interior in London. And what occurred, and while I was commissioned to do this project, was there was an explosion at the Italian embassy at the bottom there. And there was this idea of these two explosions occurring, one which is through a gas leakage, and one which is kind of positioned on an internal condition of a flat in London. So the idea of explosion as a kind of really guiding force on how to organize a space within a kind of confined space within terrace of Eaton Place, which is kind of very, very elitist zone in London, and how it's kind of really occurring almost at the same time. So what began to kind of really occur was that how you then begin to look at the furniture within the space. There's another project which we did for a project in Rotterdam, which was all the idea about how fragmentation and explosion begin to kind of affect the ground. And then the idea of the surface, which can be kind of the ground, and how you interpret the absolute projection through a position of elements within the interior of the space as if stretched into a landscape. So it has a connection between the idea of landscape as an overall kind of territory and the entire landscape of how you can organize internally a space of a domestic condition. And therefore, what began to, again, is that really the idea, the drawing, expression of the drawing, how you can begin to kind of really connect these spaces, also not in terms of only graphics, but in terms of how you connect them in terms of organization of the house, that there are these kind of three towers, one which it becomes maintained kind of a certain degree of classical condition, which is as found, and the interior space, which is being worked on in the 60s, then it becomes overworked, and the beginning of this connection between, like the projection of the horizontal and vertical surfaces becoming one. Exploring kind of roof terraces and another domain that began to look at other territories in the city which you can really then occupy, which have a similar condition than the ground, which is rooftops. A project also, it was the end of year show for the students here in year 9, and which is the connection of the continuous surface of the ground to the vertical zone. I think that was in 1984, 85, and this project was of cutting lines through the city and to look at these kind of zones which are not visual lines but kind of arbitrary lines, and how they begin to explore the city. Again, one of these projections which becomes the ground begins to kind of really cover you, implying again horizontal, vertical, and horizontal again, therefore enclosing within this surface. Parc de la Villette, which was to remain a pastoral kind of park, except for a few elements which are imposed on it. Going back to kind of East Park, which was done many years ago, it was interesting how the idea of landscape becomes very topical now, and also the connection between landscape and building. And how the idea of the peak really emerged through the kind of the carving of the rock on the Hong Kong island, and through carving of the rock beginning to kind of really replace it with a new kind of geological plate, and how these plates could become almost a neogeology, which are kind of built in that way. And so therefore, these projections, if I go back onto the projections between the real aerial view and the imaginary aerial view, was that in every case the existing landscape was slightly changed, in the sense that there were interpretation of the idea of the landscape. Piers, there's a chair for you here. Sorry. No, that's okay. I can take a break. It's a very long talk, and I'm really need a few fresh moments. So the idea, there's a what is that outside? You think? Accident. There's a burglar alarm. Well, the students here left their Ferrari outside. Somebody's trying to burgle it. Sorry. I swore to myself that I would not become cynical here, but I can't help it. And the idea of the kind of the rock and how it's carved away, and then how it is replaced by this new, what we call beams, which by the nature that they are replacing existing landscape, they become the nature where they become also through engineering. The idea of fluidity began to really start with the kind of beams which are using structural systems which are not. They are used for maybe motorways or bridges, which allows a degree of fluidity and freedom within the beam itself. the snowstorm, which is kind of snowing over Hong Kong and kind of linearly towards the harbor. So the introduction between the configuration of the ground as a built form and the existing landscape. A grand building, which was in one of the series of programs which we did in the mid-80s, which had to do with the idea of the building, which is larger than a building but smaller than a city, which is that it's kind of really the quality of urbanity which it has within this confine can deal with the whole issues of, let's say, Trafalgar Square. This one prediction also deals with the idea of the ground, which how it begins to kind of be much more malleable, and also deals with the idea that the building, how it reflects in different times of the day, so it's seen at midnight, and how the towers relate to the towers surrounding it, which is Big Bang and the churches and so on, and how, in terms of kind of, it relates to the idea of the urban space as in Trafalgar Square, how it relates from an area view to the surrounding, and how the towers of the building begin to also relate to the kind of the projected ambition of the City of London taking on another kind of life. So another project for London also, which isolates or locates areas of development, and that therefore, like the Dockland, the Isle of Dogs, in this case Greenwich, they are seen as satellites of the city. They are not seen as a kind of a suburban entity that they are supposed to kind of acquire a metropolitan entity which is parallel to the quality of life in the city. So this is, is that you, Brett? Singing. Sorry. It's a very noisy school in terms of kind of instruments. Brett in particular has to have a stopwatch telling him every hour of the day what he should be doing. In case that was Brian actually who forgets. I have to stop for a minute and really, I have to say this work has not been done on my own. I have to say that categorically there are many people who are in this room today who have been collaborators or have helped me a great deal over the years and put up with me, which is quite amazing, considering what a pain I am. So they are fragmented within the space, and I will name them later. It was Brian who used to remind himself what to have for lunch, in case he forgot. And he still does, most probably. Brian tried very hard to organize Unit 9, but because chaos on the AA did not allow him to. Victoria in Berlin, which was another of a series of programs which had to do with the idea of the ensemble, which is Berlin. This is before the wall came down, and Berlin was very curious that they have kind of they had explored every territory of land, and there was no land left because Berlin was an enclave within East Germany, so that it could not expand anymore. So when they used all the land, they began to actually reappropriate existing courtyards, which were, in this particular case, on Kudam. So what was interesting in having kind of from 1979-80 to 88, decided to build everything in the kind of restore the city in a conventional way, in its old way, which is based on courtyard buildings, but to go back to actually then explore the courtyard again was an interesting one. So therefore, what we thought was important that what began to occur is the idea of the incomplete composition on the ground, which means that the ground condition remains flexible. You can build 3 of these beams, or 5 or 10, or you can leave it empty. It still maintains a degree of movement and fluidity. You sink certain kind of really programs below ground, which is to do with the extension of the shopping. Therefore, the idea that if you maintain to kind of leave a site open, gives a degree of infiltration, which is to do with civic zones, the idea of public zones. Civic zone becomes very important and how these could be are interpreted. And the building and then is only lifted, occurs on certain datum. So the idea of datum that it can occur, this idea of layering horizontally and vertically becomes also another issue which is very, very important. And in the peak it was horizontally. In Berlin, in this case, it was these layers began to occur, in a different kind of way. The site in this case is the tungsten light firewall. So Berlin also, before the wall came down, there was but done in a very small size. And I think these products became so tight and controlled that it required an incredible degree of precision of what you impose on them. What became really also for us very important is the idea of lightness, how the building meets the ground, how do you interpret the ground condition, whether you occupy it, like you kind of cut it off, and the intention that in this case, how do you build a scheme which fits within 2 meters by 15 meters long, 50 meters wide, and therefore you have to cantilever over the street. So the buildup of the structure and all the surviving walls internally become really very intertwined. But became also this exploration into structure and how structure can really give you space which you could not otherwise conceive becomes also another very important exploration. So there's a series of firewalls which allow you a degree of movement within the space, so that eliminates the idea that there's no corridor. You have two cores coming at the back and not the back and the front. It allows you also by shifting the stairs. So two things occur. The shifting walls and the shifting staircases allows you this kind of fluid movement vertically, and therefore the structure becomes a kind of a Verndiel, which is vertical, like a boxed structure which is cantilevered off the firewall. And then this becomes a series of layers, vertical layers, which become kind of enclosed by a curtain wall, which becomes the idea of the sandwich. The sandwich, as a kind of concept for developing these very small tight size, becomes very crucial. That was a product in the IBA building in Berlin, another corner. And so the sides become ridiculously tighter and tighter. There's a 3-meter side in Japan, and so also in the late 80s, the kind of the tightness of the side became also ridiculous. But despite that, we thought it was important that the difference between the requirements vertically and horizontally and so on left these kind of really halls, whether planning halls or zoning halls, which could become carved away to be made into kind of really public spaces. And the other thing which is to do with the carving away space to allow light and life into other territories than the ground. And this particular project, the idea that the existing building which is to be demolished, that building will always become absent, and the program is then pushed vertically and horizontally, pushed below ground, and therefore not to do with the idea of basement, but to do with the idea of the carbon, the idea of peeling away the ground. One of the early projects was just to do with the idea of beginning to manipulate the idea of the ground condition and how this becomes really eventually much more developed. And the idea of structure that in Japan, structure is no longer just about the idea of triangulation and earthquake structures and how this could also be interpreted. The carving, the bringing of light into the ground and bringing with it the idea of almost kind of sieving life into another place. Many people kind of were baffled by this drawing because I thought this is a stupid building which has too many staircases. This is again, the staircases are not on one level. The staircases always occur on different levels. So therefore, they are, on the X-ray drawing, they're seen as one, as if they are one in one plane, but they're not. The one on the edge occurs between ground and below ground. The one which has a red wall occurs also on another level on the second basement below ground. The one which has a yellow piece going up occurs from the ground to the first level, from the middle mezzanine to the top level. So none of these staircases are in the same plane, which means that in every kind of space which they occupy, you can use below them or above them, which becomes also the idea that also they become spaces of transparency. And again, by coincidence and desire, one started making these transparent models, which also allow the idea of transparency horizontally and vertically. So the idea that you can accomplish and also achieve transparency not only through the material, but also through the way you carve out spaces and allow this kind of light to penetrate them in different ways. And we used to like really torturing ourselves in the office, so we used to do these drawings. This is done by Michael Wolfson, which was to do a drawing which was transparent, seeing through every level below the planet. But these were actually also revealing because we began to kind of really see where these connections began to occur. The idea that the drawing almost does what the plexi model would do. So the idea of the carve and the rock and similarity between that and spaces of liquid, which I will talk about later on. There's a project in a commission we did for a quarry in Austria. And this is an interesting story, which is that you see the Danube, the church over there. There's the existing quarry which still operates. And in this town, Carnuntum, there was it was the site of a very large Roman settlement, and also it's also a spa. So those who have TB from the dust of this quarry can then become purified in the spa. It's a very strange kind of. It's like an AA project in a way. Have asthma and then go somewhere to get detoxed. So the idea of the quarrying and the idea of terracing and quarrying, and the idea that terracing was the beginning of making of the kind of the idea of theater and amphitheater because of the kind of terracing of the land. And in this case, the idea that the land becomes like a massive theater. And there are 4 projects which are a museum for archaeology, because it was an archaeological site, a pavilion for geology, all the kind of land study, another belvedere which one never really knew what it did. It kind of sat there. But in our case, we decided that the ground would peel and began to kind of really embrace. It's all to do with kind of really embracing the landscape and the rock and appreciating it in a very, obviously, strange way. And so we began to look at kind of the idea also of camouflage, how we begin to reinterpret the idea of contouring, and how we begin to connect all these quadrants, which are very disparate, quite far away, into one idea, one frame of landscape. And the quadrants being brought together, becoming almost one product, and the idea that they come together and they separate in a visual sense. So visually they're connected, but geographically they are distant. And we began also to making the model is suddenly the connection between a solid, the idea of rock, and liquid. And therefore these two beings which are immersed into the rock, which seem almost they are floating on water or liquid. And these two, you can make almost these two materials which are seen as different kinds of crystal, who are very different, become quite similar in terms of an organizational condition. So the idea of the kind of the solid rock, which is being then seen as in this case as a mass of auditoriums for the Copenhagen Concert Hall, and how by kind of chiseling it away or kind of beginning to kind of really carve it away, beginning to allow light into it, begins to kind of really reorder, reconfigure the idea of space of performance in this particular case. So there are a series of kind of theatre which are sitting over each other, but compressed into one zone, which was given a frame, almost floating into like a kind of bubbles in a liquid. And I have to show Cardiff because it is, and I don't want to go into the Cardiff politics, although that is the most interesting part of it, in a sense. But as Peter Cook used to say, it will emerge. So starting from doing Copenhagen to really interpreting the idea of the Cardiff Opera House, which was for us a very interesting project because we were asked to do this about 3.5 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and it was before all the Millennium competitions. It was before there was any competitions in the UK. It was also it had more than one client. It had the client of the proprietors of the opera house, whoever the trustees were, and had the client of the Welsh National Opera, and had the client as kind of really how to place the idea of an opera building within the context of opera buildings in the world, and how to then also address the issue of interpreting that not in a capital, in another city in the UK. First, the significance of actually having public buildings outside of the capital is very, very crucial, because I don't think you can have life extended everywhere as a matrix only based on the idea of housing. You have to kind of really penetrate with the idea of civic and public buildings. And the Welsh National Opera is a very important company, and it had no and home. And therefore, one's target is to kind of really satisfy so many different, in a way, imaginary clients and different criteria. One which is to place it in Cardiff, one which is to place globally and within the context of the UK, but also it has to operate in an interesting way as a space of performance. So this is the dock. You can see the idea of the context. It's a very, there isn't much context. The Bute Avenue, not in the city, but down here. This was a swamp. It was the Cardiff, the bay was redundant many years ago. It was a swamp, and they decided to really rejuvenate it by making extended the city. And I think it is also parallel to many projects which are European projects, which are where the dockland and the harbour is very approximate to the city. The line which you see crossing it is what is called Bute Avenue, which was another ambition by the Cardiff Corporation to make that into kind of a major avenue to extend life all the way from the city all the way to the harbour. The small red building, which is Pierhead Building, which was a terracotta building, which was really, that was seen as the ultimate context, and the other building, which is trying to be contextual by being in red brick, and that was the idea that you're not contextual. And the white thing is Will's also sausage, which is hopefully still there. So in a way, the sausage really gave us a clue that this is a situation which is very liberal. They would like to you kind of have a non-traditional kind of so-called architects doing different things, and that life, as a contextual sense, cannot just be interpreted in a kind of a plan full of bricks. And so this was the site. The idea of the avenue, the red is the drawings from the brief, and they always thought, why is our building formed in that way? But it was exactly kind of following the boundaries of the site. So the idea that if you look at kind of an urban condition, what kind of intensity an avenue could have and what kind of public buildings are on that street, and you begin to kind of really bring it together and wrap it around the site, almost what we call as a kind of a rather necklace, to kind of really begin to kind of enclave these different facilities within one space. So in a sense, you are trying to kind of really suck into a building an urbanity which could exist only beyond the boundaries of that building, and therefore that the building had to have more than just becoming an opera. The composite of all these different, so the idea that the edge which follows the periphery of the site is ancillary facilities, starting from offices, rehearsal spaces, dressing rooms, the main stage, stage storage and so on, and then the offices of WNO. So there are two arms to the kind of embracing the main auditorium, which are the arms of the visiting companies and the arm of WNO. All the different things which are attached to the arms are all spaces of performance, which are all the rehearsal rooms. And then on one hand, they cluster together like in a kind of a universe, a cluster of stars on the edge. This kind of perimeter condition is then lifted off the ground, resting on what we call the bubble. The bubble is another territory of the ground becoming kind of really almost inflated to allow for another room to take place there, which is a public room, a public facility, which is the idea of the ricochet effect of the outside space on the quality of the auditorium. The idea of how these balconies began to kind of also be interpreted, the interior and the exterior, the asymmetry, what began to occur as the idea of asymmetry to kind of generate an energetic sound, and early studies of that interior of the main volume. Many studies of the idea of acoustic panels on the ceiling or on the walls, how you can really shift from lyric theater to opera by kind of really the kind of reflection of sound and also absorption of sound, and how this could be when there is a lyric performance of musicals. These red pieces are felt kind of funnels which could be dropped and begin to kind of really suck the sound into them. The exploration of the ground condition and how this could also become an extension of the public domain. So therefore the idea is that the ground becomes another extension of the city and the public domain, which becomes has two surfaces. The interior surface, which becomes foyers and lobbies, and exterior surface, which becomes an extension of the public space in the city. There was a period when we wanted to look at the combination of the Russian National Opera and the Opera House with the National Museum for Wales, and how these could be sharing the same territory and also sharing the same ground, and therefore how that these kind of then become not only entry points but also become separation points between these different territories. So the ground condition becomes another quadrant in such a way that to allow different functions, and therefore it applies kind of different kind of intensity on the ground where the sharers and program together. The so-called infamous crystal necklace, and how all this really led to kind of really occupying the ground in a much more kind of generous and fluid way, and saying that the ground condition could become, where I'm trying to make really three large rooms in the city, one which is in the ground, which is the foyers, one which is outdoors, which is the leftover space, which is carved away from the mass of the opera, and the main auditorium. In most opera houses, you build a very large mass, and therefore the hierarchy is then to put all the other facilities kind of stuffed in different places where they have no light and no air. And it was for us really a preoccupation to actually to change that hierarchy and to say that people who spend a lot of time working there, from the people who work in Russian National Opera to the workers in the sets spaces, could have a degree of also of luxury within these spaces, that they have light, they have air, they have also views of the harbor. The connection between the balconies and the main auditorium and the balconies which rest within the courtyard. So when you are in the courtyard, you have a kind of a kind of semi-enclosed world which has a different kind of feeling, but also is lifted off the ground and also lifted off the bubble. So you can have light flooding the whole territory, and you have light coming in. This product changed a lot of times, so this is one of its last journeys before it totally died. The drop-off point. So the idea that this view of this view towards Bute Street, that you begin to see the activity on daily basis of the performance spaces, of the kind of rehearsals, and also people moving scenery. So therefore, it began to also connect to the idea of the community and the Cardiff Bay, and it's no longer just an isolated object which is kind of blanked out, but actually, because of its transparency, it does allow you to look and see what's happening through it. The entry point is the stairs going all the way to the auditorium. The bubble as the building rests on it, and again the idea of that, through kind of the really clever engineering, and Jane is sitting here, one can really begin to kind of interpret spaces and free spaces in different ways. So the bubble meets the ground at zero by the basin, and then begins to kind of lift up to maybe 7-8 meters to allow for the ground condition to kind of really take place. Can I start? So I group these lecture in groups, which is one which is to do with the first is a preamble, but obviously the space is a performance, which is Copenhagen, Cardiff, and this is Luxembourg. And then I'll go through kind of infrastructural projects which are like bridges, like in terms of engineering also in terms of spaces, and then end with kind of more recent projects, which is museums, which we've done in the last 2 years. So this is a strange competition to do the Philharmonie in the concert hall in Luxembourg. And I don't know whether any of you have been in Luxembourg who are from Luxembourg, but it's very kind of tweedy, it's kind of gray. But it's an interesting side because there are many kind of monumental buildings over there, but what was interesting is that how do you then avoid doing kind of a fried egg? The fried egg syndrome, which is to take a side and fry an egg in it, which is to put an object in it. And so we thought this is kind of an acropolis kind of condition, where the idea of contouring and landscape and the idea of theater could really... Mohsen, are you tired? I'm either boring you or you're tired, Morrison. Sorry. Have a nap. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be nice to him. What can I say? Can't win these days. So the idea of get him a coffee, Mickey, espresso. It's really great. You know, I used to teach here for 10 years, and the coffee here was appalling. I mean, it was poison. And no, it's great now. They have cappuccino. And they can't be only making it for me when I come over. But and the only reason we bought the coffee then is to keep our hands warm because it was so cold in winter. And it really was, it was not chicory. It was some other dust they found somewhere. It was very inspiring, I must say. Anyway, I used to, I should really also say that we should remember Alvin in this moment. Anyway, to go back to the contouring idea. So these were kind of really rather monumental buildings, and they were all made in kind of concrete or stone. And they have hired Ricardo Bofill to kind of improve them. And they decided to clad them in glass. So therefore the monumentality shift from solid to the idea of transparent, which means that it's all glass. With the help of the Arabs again, they have kind of inflicted this pain on Bofill by giving him very clever curtain walling detailing. So therefore, that there was this kind of side which was sorry, Jane, which was a kind of very unattractive car park cum garden, which they wanted a philharmonie and therefore the fried egg avoidance. So they decided, but this is kind of an acropolis. We will rebuild the mountain. We do the reverse. Instead of making it into plateau, we are rebuilding it. So this idea studies of how you begin to recontour this place to kind of take on, in the most discreet way, camouflage way, the idea of a large auditorium for a concert hall, and go back to this chamber music. So there are two halls which would then have to rest on displays, and ancillary facility rehearsal spaces, ancillary facilities, and so on. So there's a big hall and a baby hall, and the idea of kind of terracing and contouring, and also how this terracing and contouring begins to kind of really infiltrate the organization of the building. I have to also say something now. We are ridiculous in the office because we used to, I should say. We do too many, I'm criticizing myself now, because we explore everything possible to actually make an interesting condition or space. And this is seen, of course, by others as a fault. And so I was being criticized recently that I went to a presentation I would not name, that I had too many consultants with me, and I had too much stuff. And so this is the new life, If you do too many good things, you are, wrong. So you can't really win in this situation. But it is, the difficulty, I think, is that they're not all final images. There are, many of them are studies about how you can actually, in the best way, explore these spaces. So this is a study about how this quadrant, which will be rebuilt as a kind of the mountain, surrounded by the existing buildings, which are these kind of monuments to modern kind of the 60s modernity, which had a degree of solidity, but now will be all semi-transparent. There's also a museum by AMP. There is a whole bunch of hotels over there. So the idea that this is another study about the existing fabric, some of the new would-be new buildings, the museum at the edge there, the crevice, which is quite beautiful towards Luxembourg, and the side which would house this auditorium. The idea of contouring becoming part of the interior, and how again meets the ground in a very shallow way begins to step up towards the main auditorium, implying many levels of different contours housing within it different kind of spaces which have to do with the organization of the building. The two kind of interlocking auditoriums and all the kind of different elevation studies. Sectional studies, again, the ground has, you can, in terms of organization, very easy to access all the people who work and use the auditorium. If you are a visitor, you go up terrace towards one entrance and you can leave the other way, so you can terrace slowly, go into an area which is open, which is in one foyers. And if you work there, you can enter it on both sides of the building with cutouts for quarters, bringing light into some of the workspaces. Looking at the whole idea of kind of really, acoustic condition of the space, study sections, the quality of the interiors. The idea that becomes a kind of an internal and external landscape. So I should interject now, but for me that there's a difference between the idea of nature and the idea of landscape, and I still do not like nature. This has not changed. And I have to specify what it is nature. Nature is, of course, I had an aversion to kind of the English landscape. Peter Salter would die when he hears me say this. Thank God he's not here. But the idea that, Peter, forgive me, Peter. But the idea when we came as a student here, there was this, there was a kind of, if you don't know how to design to put a plant together, you put a shrub. Shrub the planet. So therefore, my antagonism towards nature, it was, which now students don't even know what zippeton, it's a great word, zippeton, plastic plants. So people misunderstood the idea of my grievance with it, but it's really, I think for me, landscape was a very different kind of situation. Also, there was a whole, if you look at publication from the 70s and 80s where every elevation, no wonder the place is full of horrible stuff, because no planners saw elevations there because it was absolutely camouflaged by trees. So hence, I didn't like it. And hence, I have no trees, no people, because of the zippeton problem. You don't know what a zippeton is, do you? That's another lecture. There's the final model showing how you can also enter, through this kind of really lifting of the ground, you can enter the building at every gap you have almost, from depending on whether you're working there or you're visiting it and so on. This is Wasim back. Do you have something for me, Wasim? If you don't, touche. Hey?
Everything except gluten-free.
Oh. Don't worry, okay. You can do it whenever you like, Wasim. There's the only chance in your life that you got, so that I'm nice to you. The one and only hour of your existence. I love Wasim, but he's always late, so what can I say? To go back to the idea of the city, and the idea, the summer the peak was done with the idea of the idea of violation. Hello? What? Revenge. It's taken him 2 years to take this on me, of course. What are you doing there? Patrick, can you please look after him? Okay. This is exactly what we did not want. Is it finished? Oh dear. Okay, thank you very much. That was really brilliant, Was. Was is our in-house computer whiz kid when he doesn't have flu. Okay. Are you waking up, Moisen? Oh, good. So, to go back to the kind of really the other series of programs which are to do with kind of linear spatial conditions, and also, in this case, to go back to the peak, that the two lower beams and the two top beams, the two lower beams are kind of conventionally done in terms of engineering and building, and the top two beams are like bridges. Therefore, the quality internally, because of the structure, implies a different kind of fluidity. So these are projects which were really also based on kind of highway engineering and also bridge engineering. Feature. The Vita Fire Station. We did a study in Weil about 4 years ago of how Weil, the city where Vitra is built, could expand and so on. And this was one of the studies how also the impact of the idea of the vineyards on the kind of the campus of industry, and how they begin to kind of really connect between industry, landscape, and architecture and program. This is the side before really as the Frank Berry buildings kind of were finished, before the Caesar building was added, and before the fire station. So looking at this as kind of really a colossal, massive production, and the intention was how you look at this idea of the mass. And when we were asked to do the fire station, there was no particular site where you can really locate it, and therefore we look at the idea of the mass as a kind of continuous, a large mass, look at the interior quality of this space of production, and we said if there is the same kind of space applied on the other side of the same kind of nature, but we had to kind of maintain a zone in between, which is a space which is outdoors, which is carved away from these two kind of masses, old one and new one, of spaces of production. And how you can insert a space which is a cultural, has a kind of a cultural entity, and how this becomes a kind of an avenue of events which can take place within the domain of the factory campus. This is really rare shot, of course. It's very rare to see it from this view now. And for us, what was interesting was that the shift occurred when the building became kind of really based on a series of walls and transformed to a series of volumes, which kind of really hold each other, and also the idea of the space which is woven from one into the other, and how the building also shrinks and expands as you see it lengthwise and widthwise. Widthwise, the organization says that between these walls are different kind of programs, and lengthwise, because of the length of the building and its narrowness, you visualize it in a different way. What was also interesting for us is how to also, by not using glass, how to achieve lightness and transparency through the use of very kind of really heavy material, and therefore the cuts in the building allows you to see continuously through it. The slits in the front beam, which is the wet beam where all the showers and the toilets, I originally wanted a line exactly lining up with where the bottom of all the firemen would be. But Rolf told me that the Swiss are very puritanical. This is not going to go anywhere, so they are higher. And of course, the idea between the interior space and the exterior space, that they are really one. And despite the narrowness of this building, that the room is no longer above the space which is behind the glass, but it becomes part of an extended space beyond the boundaries of the glazing area. So it becomes a larger room. The lightness of the building when it's open to when it's closed, where the space, which is the garage, becomes a room. And seeing from above how these cuts into the building allow this idea of transparency, and also that there is a kind of a degree of motion implied in the way this building is also resting at the end of this carved out space, which becomes also, the building becomes the boundary of the site. So the idea of kind of really dealing with rather strange infrastructural sites like the one in Vienna, there's a project for Spitzelau, which is this is the Danube Canal. These are all the viaducts and the bridges by Otto Wagner. This is a universities at the edge there, outside the ring. And the idea is, at the time we were given the study, is to look at how you can begin to kind of infiltrate people and students from this university to the Danube Canal, and also how you begin to program, connect the housing on the edge here, and there's a very strange building by Hundertwasser, which is a power station. And basically, how to then make the space accessible, but also how to begin to, through program, begin to actually access programmatically and connect it to the other part of the city. So looking at this kind of really infrastructure of all these massive, freeways and bridges, new and old, and how the infrastructure, which is now part of it, is redundant, which is not used as a viaduct, how this could be really occupied by program, and how you can really begin to kind of cut through these existing arches to begin to allow some kind of really transparency or connection between the life on the canal and life beyond on the side of the motorway. So by just really breaking away the bricked out arches, you can bring in some sort of life, but also the idea whether you can build a program for housing and students. These are mostly catering for the student body, and also younger families, and also artists, which begins to connect university to the water. So by generating a life on this is also a different level. There are also levels were all disparate. There's not one level which is the same. There's a pit behind the arches with a bridge above, which is a cycling bridge. And the idea, how do you connect all these different levels in one motion, so it becomes like a volumetric kind of ribbon which wraps around the viaduct, which has only legs on the ground, which becomes housing and offices at the back. So it has kind of this series of feet, which has kind of public program and entrances to the flats above. But the intention is that you leave the space of the viaduct completely open to make use of it as a public kind of corridor where people can still use it or cycle through. It becomes also like a linear park. A series of study models showing also all the different levels and how this project begins to wrap them together and begin to kind of really look at these different spaces. Study of how the elevation should be treated, whether it should be louvered or solid or transparent. Study of a deck which could be on the edge of the Danube, the canal. And the idea that this becomes really kind of this kind of compressed, and this one zone kind of as a kind of a ribbon which becomes inhabited and also begins to begin to allow kind of openings to both sides. This idea of the ribbon, while it falls on itself, becoming a kind of a space. You don't have this, was do you? No, of course not. Why should I think you did? And how becomes wrapped around itself, becoming kind of like a knot as a spatial condition. This was built for Blueprint in Birmingham 2 years ago. So this idea of the space becoming kind of really compressed and expanded occurs also on the Thames, on the river. And this is the Habitable Bridge, which is another project which we won, sort of. And this is a contentious subject, whether how one can occupy a water and impose a kind of private accommodation onto it, and should the river become like any other part of the city, or shouldn't it? Observing the kind of these bridges at this point in time, at this point on the Thames, there are kind of many bridges, but they're never all to do with kind of pedestrian or vehicular, but they are all alternate between that and kind of maybe rail bridges. And the idea if you're trying to make a new bridge, how do you import a kind of an urbanity and superimpose it, which has a difference, and how do you then begin also the idea of movement and crossing? So if you look at it, a series of bridges which are compressed together like a bundle, like one bridge, and then simultaneously, as if in the study for London, pulled apart, stretched like a kind of a chewing gum across the Thames. It has weak moment of weakness, which means that its weak moment begin to kind of allow the flow of the river to pass through it. So what we're trying to do is to try to do a bridge almost like the river, like a space of liquid where it has a malleability and transparency and flexibility which stretches across it. The intention also was that having the only way you can really achieve this bridge as a commercial, not done by the city but commercially, is that it has to have a kind of a critical mass, a mass which makes it 30,000 square feet to make it kind of viable or commercially viable as an entity. But that mass, if you put it on the Thames, begins to block east and west, and so by achieving connection between north and south, you're blocking east and west. But by pulling it apart and dispersing that mass into the south bank and clustering it towards the north, you allow it. You can maintain the idea of transparency within the river. So the idea, this is a bridge which has no center, which has no middle, which has been dispersed and there's a program on both sides. The other thing, which is that it's made of, there's one of these incomplete compositions, which means that you can build 2 tanks or 20 or 3. They are what we call, Jan, correct me, between fish tanks, shoe boxes, which are really basically platforms which will have trusses which are then manufactured downstream and brought on the river and hoisted up to make a kind of series of locked elements with spaces in between, like internal streets, and that there are many ways of crossing the river on different layers, which these are all the kind of movement through the ramps and the bridges, which have become very light as they connect north and south. And also the idea is that you can spend a whole day here, you can go for the day, you can go, and the tips of these buildings are all to do with public facilities. So suddenly these kind of also, there's a platform which house what could be apartments, which could be offices or hotels, and below could become all public facilities. I'm really in Wasim's hands. He is intercepting me when he feels like it. This is ridiculous.
We have to change the slide.
Oh, I see. Very convenient, thank you. We're diving underwater. Thank you, boss. There's a funny thing happening there. Colors are off us. I'm blessed by the men in the office, colorblind syndrome. It's a complete blessing. Can we stop this now? Thank you. Okay. So the plan which means that on the lowest level is very kind of light, which has only structure, and the bridges, and as you begin to kind of lift up, you have accommodation which is then stacked above. Views, which was seen as better than me, seeing one. So the idea that as you kind of promenade through this building, you can see one building from the other building, and how these different layers also can have light bridges which have different speeds which cross the river. So you can pass this building very quickly, you can go very slowly, you can change in the middle through these spaces, and despite that, your views to Westminster and also to St. Paul, which of course to many people is very religious experience. So we try to kind of really achieve a completely transparent but also invisible bridge. The other winning entry was a decorated tower, it looked like kind of, these kind of Elizabethan headdresses which have pearls, and it kind of was there. I wouldn't like to kind of say what it looked like exactly, but anyway, it was a very interesting story that they decided the public vote was for the tower, and then the people who were involved in this competition decided that, don't worry, the tower is not really, we will build the tower, but we'll change the tower. So it means that we'll eliminate the tower. So we don't know what happened to this project now. So the idea that, through this kind of gaps in the building also, your view across the river is also uninterrupted. Those who have seen this show, really, the most interesting part of the show was the color of the water in the Thames, which is absolutely accurate. And I did not know that this was like a bathtub hall there, And somebody, I'm not sure whether John Gummer came to empty the bathtubs, or Nigel maybe. Anyway, that was really it's very difficult to portray the Thames, but that was pretty brilliant. So the idea that on one side the cluster which connects the idea of the program to the Trafalgar Square, to the Strand, and also to the whole series of hotels which are also on the embankment, therefore imply that could be a particular, it connects also to Temple Station, and they are kind of really clustered together as a kind of urban cluster. As they move across the river, they begin to kind of really disperse, and then when they land on Coin Street, they begin to disperse, and also that they begin to connect to the landscape of Coin Street. That could become also housing, connecting kind of social housing and private housing clustered over together, and the space in between becomes a series of kind of really black avenues which are internalized. The idea of the cluster and the idea of the quarrying also comes together for a new project we're doing in southern Germany. This is going back to the Vitra fire station and the Vitra workshop. When I did the workshop 5 years ago, one of the students in my group was a very nice guy who became the mayor of Weil. And when he became the mayor, he invited me to, and that's the truth, he invited us to do a building which is for one of the buildings for the garden show for next year. So the Vitra, the town is here, Vitra is one side, and the quarry is sort of the other side. So there's a sister to the fire station. And the idea that this is a site which is quarried and will be left more or less as found, so it's like another objet trouvé exercise, as found, but except they had a competition for landscaping, and the landscaping that was done separately, and we are just resting. We take part of that whole landscaping. So this building is although to do with the idea of landscape, but we're not doing the landscaping for this project. We're just doing the building, which is a multi-purpose hall, a theater, offices, an outdoor kind of courtyard, a restaurant, and so on. It has one life, just to do with the show, and when the show is on, and it would have another kind of life when the show ceases, or the garden show, and becomes something else. And the idea that it's also to do with this kind of idea of kind of peeling of the ground and bundling together like a kind of like a bundle of flowers, and the idea of kind of the ground being kind of peeled up and becoming also a high ground where people can also see the rest of the show, but also within it can accommodate these different programs, which are quite small, not a very large building. This is done in collaboration with Patrick Schumacher and Marcus, who is somewhere, I don't know where, and with also partners with the office who did the working drawings and for Vitra, Rohan Meyer and his new partner. So this is the plan that there's a series of kind of spaces which kind of split and bundle, and also it means that also you can enter in one layer, you can cross the building without having through it. So the idea that the building can actually operate while you actually cross through it, and also uses terraces to view other parts. So you can either enter it or cross it, and you can pass through it like a path in the park. And the idea, once all the landscaping is done, this becomes one of the paths which visitors will take through. And the idea of the kind of the connection between the idea of the gland, the quarrying, and also the surfaces, becoming also, the whole issue the idea of ecology and the earth, and it's a very big kind of issue in Germany, but also, I must say, we achieved that not by deliberately doing it, but by trying to kind of really only using surfaces which are horizontal and digging into the ground and burying some of this program makes it kind of also to deal with these issues. So this idea of terracing and the carving simultaneously of outdoor spaces for outdoor exhibitions and also for use by the public, for theaters and so on. And so that the idea that becomes kind of like a braid where these two spaces begin to intertwine to allow for this kind of crossing of these spaces internally and externally. So they have fluid spaces which allow movement through the building by going inside or going literally out of it. So this is the length side as it peels up, and in the middle part is where you can cross it. And to go to this presentation in Germany, I thought this would be nice in a vase. So here it is, the kind of flowers and the flower garden show in a vase. So from one kind of category of really research and drawing, our interest has always been how the city and how you impose, you kind of really deal with smaller sites in the city, whether you strategically deal with the larger idea of the city, but that has always been our kind of really, and how to interpret an urbanity through declaration of areas which could be have a degree of flexibility and also a degree of openness. And once you move away from the idea of fortification into the enclosed space, but once you move away from the idea of open ground territories, you begin to imply an invasion of kind of civic spaces in areas which should not become private. And therefore, we designate a series of parts in the city to become non-private zones, but become public or civic zones. And this study has always been to do with how you begin to actually organize these kind of spaces and what they mean in the context of the city. And there's a diagram of Madrid where it shows that Madrid, in this particular case, is a product how to where the areas in Madrid which could be expanded in the future. And this slide which shows how there are pockets, smaller pockets in the city which attach themselves to main corridors, but the outer areas which are with motorways which connect areas of very large housing, these could have larger pockets of public facilities. These are studies of the old city, the existing corridors, and maybe new corridors which can then connect the center to the area which is where the airport is, which implies that there's almost a given life, but one has to kind of really expand on that and also layer it with different kind of programs. So these two kind of connections between the idea of this kind of really compressed, striated kind of built landscape and the idea of landscape of buildings which are like the housing in the field, with how you can really use the existing redundant areas like railway yards, which are enormous territories, and how this can become then what we call landmass, how this landmass becomes civic territories, and how this could be interpreted in areas which are adjacent to housing, which could have sports facilities, cultural facilities, libraries, and so on. And that these are areas which are not only confined, these programs are not confined to only the center of the city. These could be also service areas for areas which are of very low income housing, that life for those people should actually have equal pleasure to those who actually live in a very intense kind of urban conditions. So therefore, this used land, which is like railway line, could be then interpreted as a kind of landmass, which is like kind of glass mountains or whatever. So the idea of landmass really becomes also looked at again in a project for Cologne Harbour. There's an installation of the Kroller in Holland, where this is a 20-meter long wall. So the idea of also the work we do, which is the difficulty is we do a lot of installations, exhibitions, publications, which is not necessarily what we think is our kind of really métier, but we are also, they are an important part of what is called propaganda, the machine, but also they are important sometimes to actually explore ideas in very different kind of ways and make accessible to different kind of people ideas which have to do with special organization and also conditions of infiltration of these public facilities. So these are the Cologne Harbor, the area which we look at, which is the strip of the existing warehouses, is about 1 kilometer long. It's very adjacent to the city, and by just doing a kind of study of the city configuration, we began to realize that when the two conditions meet, there is a very large mass of land which is unattended to. It's not part of the competition, it's not part of our area, but it's not part of the city, and therefore we began to kind of think about how, like a comb, bringing these two things together. So this idea of this kind of what we call landmass, that is not a building, it's not a landscape, it's a kind of marriage of building and landscape, which can accommodate for a very large program. Therefore, the large program is disguised in what we think is like kind of a mountain or a kind of a very large kind of park, but they are not necessarily so-called as a nature, but they are seen as mass. So how to interpret mass of large scale in this particular conditions. And the interpretation of kind of also in this case the idea of interpreting the idea of workspace, the office building in Düsseldorf, which is how to really if you move away from the idea of the box and you begin to kind of cut out all the areas which are kind of non-useful, so-called, but also what was important, how do you deal with the idea of water, and how do you deal with the idea of how to position building by a harbor, and how you can make it possible that every person there almost can actually have view of the water, but obviously view of themselves. You can see your adjacent sites. And the issue is, Jan, this is your favorite drawing, I know. This is one of my favorite drawings because I used to have some rather torturous meetings with Arabs, engineering, and God bless them, they have been incredibly generous to me. But one occasion I said, it is kind of getting to be very boring. Can one of you guys go and look at what one can do if one is dealing always with kind of rather thin, long buildings, and also not wanting to kind of have the idea of the column grid. Column grid, like a kind of bars or a prison coming to the ground. How do you do with the idea of the shifting of structure? So the kind of the transfer, the idea of transfer of structure, and what this can allow you to do, on the ground, and what it can do in the actually interior of the building. This obviously is one eventually translated through this building in Düsseldorf through a series of kind of really rather massive structural elements to kind of a forest of columns, like almost, then therefore the landscape and the structure becomes also intertwined. How you begin to interpret the idea of the core as being always the most dominant, rather a dominating force of a building, and particularly in Germany, because you have to only be particular distances from the kind of exits and also from the tips of these buildings. How you begin to kind of really if we want to also maintain transparency, that this could not be fragmented throughout the fingers, but it had to be clustered like in a motorway inside these series of slabs. The two skylines which are visible, the new skyline which is of the building, which is transparent, versus the solid skyline which allows transparency of all the infrastructure of the building. So the idea that the towers becoming also the towers of all the cores and all the services. Then comes the issue of how you interpret the ground condition, which is open, almost in this case, this is what in Germany they went through, they built every Congress hall, every sports hall, and in the late 80s they had media centers. So every city in Germany had a media center, and in this particular case, it was really a connery to actually allow the city to give the land, which was in this case had a very interesting warehouse land, to the developers, so that, by saying we will allow for artists to be here, you can have it for free. So the idea that the ground, therefore, it was non-definitive, and also the idea that how do you then generate a kind of an urbanity in that site, which is approximate to the city, but also it has only warehouses, and how we can generate an urban condition on that ground which could have a different kind of life. So the beginning of the idea of of the idea of combining the landmass with the idea of landscaping and terracing and program and also views towards the water. Many drawing which really is about the journey of the building, about the story of the building, which shows its many facets, how it rests on the ground, how it's transparent on the ground, very transparency, very solid, how the idea dressed within as a kind of an ensemble. Oops. An ensemble, how it reflects on the water, how it's building in a way like the previous one, which of the scale begin to cluster and separate. So one view you see it like a flower all broken up, and the one view you can see it in a series of layers. And in this project we try to kind of really also achieve the idea of layering an office building in many layers and how they are. You can see right through them or you see partly through them. So all that 2,000 drawings, which we all slaved on, including Brett here and Brian and Patrick and many others, to achieve this plan for the Bahntrag. So this 4 years of work was to achieve the ultimate so-called dome plan, which, so in a way, kind of had, this plan had sucked into it all these researchers to make it possible for this building to be understood not only by the city officials, but also that it meets all the criteria for planning, and it did. So we move from this idea of even if this building was about an open space, it was for the purpose of the application had to be kind of fortified, which means you have to kind of really imply and fortification again around it for the idea of size, scale of the building, the location of the site, perimeter of the site. We had to go back to this again. We had to kind of cheat it once and stuck out to a neighboring site and how they can buy the neighboring site, how they can cantilever over the Rhine. The difference between Düsseldorf and Cologne is that in Cologne the Rhine is very narrow, which means that it floods, which allows us also a degree of kind of the idea that the ground is floodable and malleable. And in this case, it's wider, and therefore the idea of flooding is very different. And the idea of also by lifting it off the ground so that you don't always have to have floodable basements and so on. So the idea to move from one fortification to another, the V&A project, which was the idea that to fill the last courtyard, how to fill the last courtyard apart from Pirelli Gardens of the V&A. All museums now have a thing called orientation. Just it means that if you are lost, you go there, and it will orientate you to find your way. But basically, it's an excuse to actually have a kind of a garage for student educational facilities, which is fine. So when I went for my interview, I thought, do you want a red flame or a red frame? And meaning they could be similar, but they are very different. A red flame meaning a vase, a red flame, and then a red frame meaning it was just a frame where this thing could actually take place. So we had a jello. So they decided to kind of really how to achieve to fill the last quarter of the V&A with a space of liquid, and how it kind of begins to connect to all the other galleries. What kind of system of organization could one impose on it? And the idea that the idea of pixelation as a kind of system and also in 3 dimensions. Wasim, you have to tell me when you want to attack my screen. Whenever I want. And how that, because their ambition was that the 21st century collection by the V&A would be a virtual collection. Therefore, it implied that it has a different kind of rules from those if it is to do with the whole collection of objects, which implied that you can't have a degree of transparency, that this adjacent sites, the kind of surrounding site, could be filled in a transparent way, and therefore the connection between the street, Exhibition Road, and the main space becomes important. For us to achieve this idea of fluidity and transparency obviously become very crucial how you interpret the idea of the structure. And in this case, it was that there were temporary galleries, permanent galleries, all have to occur on one plane. And if you measure the site, they could never occur on one plane. And also massive amount of educational facilities. And then we decided to kind of really shift it to to say the spaces which are more like heavier would be at the top, the spaces which are lighter at the bottom, and there's only one which is too heavy, which is a theater which falls down. And therefore, the difference between temporary space and contemporary galleries, then there's a thing which is called the yard. I have to say it's a yard because it's not a small street. It's a yard which becomes also a space where you can have another program which is virtual, the virtual gallery, which we don't know what it is then. And began to do is really began to stack the program over each other, occupying also the yard above the ground. And the idea that this stuff would almost, just like a glass of water, begin to kind of tip at the edge of the top layer of all the mansards and the towers on the top of the V&A. So versus the void, they have same almost the void between the two skins in the front. To our light penetration is plans which are done by the colorblind people. By Patrick, I should not embarrass him. I must say, I have to say that Patrick Schumacher has been a tremendous asset to the office and a great friend. So I must thank him. And despite his choice of color is rather dubious, but he is really a collaborator on many of these projects, and I have to one has to give him credit for it and thank him again. So this is the pixeled, the pixelation is he was obsessed with it. It was a nightmare for all of us, but everything had to be pixeled. The chairs, between him and Brian, pixeled everything. So the heavy theater which drops off, and then the idea of the terracing, so that you go up on the roof of the theater, you climb towards the place which is supposed to direct your life, orientation, orientate you to begin to spin to other places of the V&A. And the beginning of the floor which begins to become also the elevation. The temporary galleries which could be entered in a separate way. So you can go to the V&A and also you can go to this gallery separately by just taking the lifts up, while if you are on the ground you can carry on through the ramps in the yard to go up to higher levels. This is, you can also have different ticketing. And it begins to occur this idea of internal terracing, which begins to really flow on more than one floor. To achieve this idea of the landscape in the middle of a building was to say that the structure, therefore, on the top is hung from these trusses above, and below is really like a series of decks. What it does, it allows you a space in the middle which is between these two things, which has no structure, only on the edge, almost on the edge. So these are the different volumes stacked over each other with the light, and this is showing the ground, how you really begin to climb over above the theater, looking down towards the shops and museum shops, the canopy becoming the connection between the underside of the ground floor like this and the curtain wall, the shaft of light which comes between the existing building and the new floor plates, the cluster of all the voids which cluster together, implying there's a different invisible volume implied in the space, like the big volumes. Pixelation spaces, and also implying that there's a system of organization within the space which is to do with really way exhibiting, the way you're terracing the spaces as you move gently up. So it's not a ramp, but it's a terracing space which moves up towards the next levels, which also means that you can see the object more than from one view. You can see it from below, you can see it from above. So you have a possibility of seeing all these things more than one position. The heavy top whereas the light bottom, and also the almost pastoral quality of the space in between. So this idea that the space in between becomes really this continuous, like a pastoral playground of these spaces which are terraced for exhibitions. The connection between the idea of the figure ground to the idea of curtain walling, and also how it become also intertwined with the horizontal surfaces, pixelated curtain walling with kind of gaps to see into the space. There are two skin, one which is, this is a rain kind of whatever, not curtain, whatever it's called. Rain screen, thank you, Jane. And the space in between the two skins, the inner skin and the outer skin, this is what I mean by the red frame. And then, as if to make this building, we had to kind of really remove the solid volumes and replace them as if like a kind of like a cast, these kind of rather non-horizontal kind of her surfaces with the kind of the skin wrapping around the building towards the edge. Was it's yours now. It's still wobbly, Wasim. Are you sure you fixed it? Excuse me, I must drink some water. It looks very strange to me. I'm not sure how it looks to the others. Well, thank you very much. You get an A for trying. Thank you. Can I carry on? No, I haven't finished the last carousel. Never mind. Don't worry. It's okay. It's okay, really. I come to my, really, you'd be happy to hear last project. I'm one of these Arabs who have never been to the Middle East, and I have never been to any of the Gulf states till last year. It was a very interesting year for me. I went 7 times in the Middle East, having not gone there for 21 years. This is a place called Qatar, and there was an announcement in the Times for a new museum for Islamic arts, and we were shortlisted with 7 other people. So we went to see the site, which is on the corniche. This is it. And so therefore, the kind of this is what they call Lawrence of Arabia perspective. Kind of Wasim as no, it wasn't Ivan the Terrible from Spain did it kind of Moorish. Given I'm telling him wrong country, Ivan, but or was it Garin? We have to also understand that my office is very multinational, deliberately. Cannot communicate with each other. So the idea that, also the whole the idea of landscape, dunes, water, so this is kind of very, very subtle contouring. This is very unsubtle contouring. This is how to kind of really exaggerate contouring. I should not tell a terrible story about a friend of mine many years ago, but was asked to do a contour plan in Saudi Arabia, I think, and used the wrong thickness of the card, which made it into a mountain. So this is kind of a similar, I think, similar thing. Anyway, makes a nice model. So the idea, how do you also, the program, and it was very important in this program, the idea of adjacencies. Now, only museologists understand the idea of adjacency. What is adjacent to the other? How you operate? And this is when we went to the site visit. This is a museum which will expand incredibly, but at this point in time, they have a very enormous collection of Orientalist paintings. So hence in Qatar, where everybody is veiled, you have, this kind of very strange Orientalist paintings with all that kind of, titties exposed. So there's a real realm of this tangible and non-tangible. So I think, how could they actually resolve this idea of veiling with the Orientalism was beyond me. Then there was a very beautiful and large collection of very rare coins, which obviously could be housed in a room this big. This is the size of the room which could have coins, and armory, and also a very large collection of manuscripts and Qurans, very old ones. So it means that most of these things have to be really also, cannot be exhibited all the time because of their value. So that this Washington Museum had to yet to know what would be housed in it, but anyway. One aspect of this museum is to do with education, that becomes a mandatory for all the students in Qatar, to actually young kids, to go to the museum through the traveling shows, through temporary installations, become an aspect of education in Doha. And there will be a series of museums which become not only as a place where people go and look at artifacts, but they go and do research, scholars on manuscripts and so on, but also fundamentally it's to do with that it is part of the whole educational system, and students going there on daily, on regular basis, that this idea of research, education, and museum become intertwined. And that says it was very interesting. So if you analyze the brief and you put it on that site, it becomes this. If you make it into kind of a mass of building, this is the scale of the program imposed on the site. Moisen, take it easy. Please have water, I beg you. What are they doing to Moisen, do you hear? Listen, all chairmen in the past and in the future will all blame it on council. And frankly, I sat on council for 1 year and I don't blame you, because it is really the most dire experience possible, because I could never understand when Alvin used to complain about council. I thought, well, how could they be so out of it? They are all your friends. And when I sat on council for 1 year, it was another language. I mean, I hope they've improved in the meantime, but 5 years ago, it was a very painful experience watching them disperse of every publication was done here, that they had too little storage. I mean, can you imagine a council on the planet thinking that because we have too many books, let's flog them? I mean, it's just unreal. If we have posters, let's throw them out. I mean, anyway, this could only happen in the UK. Nowhere in the world they would think that printed matter is for the garbage bin. And of course, when you question them, they will say it was a student idea, which of course was not. Anyway, to go back to contours and dunes. So we thought in terms of organization, if one then is like trying to kind of really also redo the site, and by pushing one edge, they also wanted the idea that every side there would have a periphery of greenery, as in nature greenery. So this is trying to kind of really shrink the site in a very strategic way, saying this is entry, and then how these kind of many layers of the interior life of this building could actually be resting over each other. How it becomes separate spaces, or large spaces which converge on each other. The idea of this kind of really subtle dune, and how you begin to deal with the idea of the roof, and what is between it and the ground, and what are these separate territories which form the separate galleries and also spaces of education. The path, which can also become like a citadel, where the streets internally become as important as the streets beyond, outside, and also the courtyards or the cuts in the building, horizontally and vertically, becomes also part of the infrastructure of the city and its courtyards and its light condition. So the idea of this kind of roof which flows on the ground, which flows to allow for this very large, kind of like a campus of storage of kind of these rare, sometimes very rare items, to the interpretation of almost like a miniature city plan, like a citadel. The interior condition, studies about how these roofs begin to kind of really rest over each other, and how they begin to kind of really organize the space in what I call the whoosh, which becomes very tight spaces on one side going to very large spaces on the other. So on one side, which becomes very compressed rooms, which are maybe the offices and educational facilities, to as they begin to kind of expand into very large gallery spaces. And how this idea of this kind of whoosh across the side begins to be translated, the top end with all this kind of really like overlapping surfaces and rooms, till it becomes kind of larger and larger as it stretches again across the side, allowing for the point of entry as the kind of side begins to kind of move. So there are two ways of kind of really compressing the side, widthways and stretching it the other way. Then applying another code to the whole spatial condition, because of this also idea of terracing, and this could become roots, which is almost like calligraphy imposed on a larger scale of the size. So starting with the darkest becoming the smallest to the largest beginning the kind of the lightest, with this kind of really ramps and roots which have to do with other people's movement or moving objects from different parts of the building. Structural wall spaces also, all the courtyard would bring in light into these different spaces. So the light, the courtyards, the light box becomes a source of light as artificial light, and also becomes almost like a kind of a light box, and also becomes a courtyard to allow for light and air into the building. It's kind of a very large, deep building. Thinking about how the roof could be also constructed, and also how these two things begin to kind of really also overlap. How it is placed in the city, the connection between it and also the harbor, the idea of making another space of also kind of almost like a something that's also made of liquid. The side plan with all the cuts on the roof which differ from being allowing light also to allowing light in and out, to also space of dividing the spaces. So in terms of organization, it is, the top part is all the small room to do with education, headquarters of all the offices, all the kind of restoration areas, workshops. The black zone is what we call the treasury, which is shared because of these kind of valuable items, that is kind of like a glass box which is shared by these different departments, but becomes part of the exhibition. So it's not kind of hidden away in some other place. It becomes just kind of a walled space within the gallery themselves. And the beginning of this kind of calligraphic of space of these ramps, showing the space below, which is temporary spaces. So the idea that because these the ground peels up and down like the roof, that you begin to kind of really see also areas just below grade where the temporary exhibitions are. So different quality of all these different courtyards, entries, light, also how they're connected through a path through the museum, like another kind of like infrastructure imposed, like a road system imposed, pattern of movement of people throughout the spaces, how they kind of really begin to move from one space to the other. Ideas of how also some of these things could be suspended or exhibited in between these different layers. The roof structure and also the idea of the kind of the carpets could be actually laid out almost as if they are found there. The green obviously is another theater, another object which is imposed on this kind of landscape. Study of the roof. Some of these internal spaces where you can see also below, and you see the roof condition, how the ground begins to kind of peel to go to the basement. An elevation of this kind of really rather subtle light quality in the building, which only in fragments to be seen. Upside down drawing. And seeing it in the context of the kind of city of Qatar, and also how it begins to deal with kind of this fluid spaces. The panel which was submitted for the competition, showing the sections, how it stretches from one end to the other, and the length of the whole building. Do you have anything there, Wes?
Yeah.
What?
Speak it out.
No.
Luxembourg,
No.
Abu Dhabi,
Yes.
Zigzag, or
It's up to you. Doing whatever you like. This is a project which we've done recently for a bridge to connect Abu Dhabi to the mainland. I'll only show it through this video. There's a hard version and a soft version. What I like about this is that the plan and the section become the same in the reflection. There's a creek which connects to the main water, but the thing is that one of the problems is that we wanted to have a very large span bridge, but all the bridges on the creek are very short. They have many kind of structures, so that there's no point in really having opening it up unless they thinking of replacing these other bridges. There's a soft. And I say you're soft, Wasim, but it is soft. Yeah, 1 minute. It's 1 second. He has to do it. Oops. Okay. You've had your chance. It's a different project. Was? He insists, he's like a torture. Wasim, please. You can come here alone and show them all the stuff you've done. I mean, you know. Okay, what? You finished? That's it. Thank you very much.
Zaha will take maybe 1 or 2 questions. After the flowers.
No questions? Thank you very much.
No, we ask questions. Come on.
But they don't want to ask questions.
I want an, yeah, I'll ask a question. Maybe there are two areas. One, at the beginning, you talked about the issue of other people in the office and the whole topic of kind of collaboration. I think that would be an interesting thing. Maybe if you could say something, because obviously there are people here in terms of the relationship between engineers, people in the office. That I think would be an interesting thing if you could touch on.
Can I just answer that?
Yeah.
Engineers are not like people in the office.
What?
The engineers are not like the people in the office.
They're not like the people in
They
the
don't like them.
Oh, they don't like them?
No.
Why not?
I ask Jane. I know.
Jane doesn't know. It's not true. No, okay. All right. Well, I think the other thing is to do. I was hoping maybe you would show something of the Millennium
I have it here, but I can't show it.
project, because, well, I think it might be a very good. There's so many. There's such a kind of incredible abundance of projects, and I thought that the thing that would be interesting with the Millennium is that now you have to really focus.
I know, but we can't show it.
No?
Next,
Well,
maybe,
don't show it. I'm
maybe
going
in
to
2
ask you a
weeks' time
question.
I can show
No,
it.
I'm going to ask you a question
Okay.
about it. A hypothetical question.
I want to answer it more.
Somebody else asks a question. She's not going to answer one
No,
question.
I will answer the first question.
Well, ask the question about it.
No,
Ask-
you, hello.
Okay. Talk about collaboration, and I'll ask the question about Millennium
Well,
again.
I'm not the right person to ask about collaboration, I must say.
That's why I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, I think it's very been clear from the beginning that, that this work is not really done as a kind of solo orbiting in the office. I do feel like that sometimes, but it is really, I think it's very important to understand that this is a work which is developed by other people, and everybody brings in the ideas to the situation, and is done as a kind of really a group exercise, not seen, and people bring in different expertise and different entities to it, and I think the same, and also with large projects obviously requires to work with many consultants, and then that was a very enjoyable and very exciting exercise, because each one brings in another thing to the table, and there was always a misunderstanding that in our work that we go to the engineers to make it work. That was not the issue. The issue is that, and it's particularly in the last 10 years, working with Ari Arabs and with Jane and with Peter Rice, was that these things are done really. There's never been the idea to negotiate an idea back from them. It was always seen as these things working together. It was very important for us that the structure is actually structure, services, acoustics. These things are operating with the product from the beginning. They're not seen as someone you resort to resolve the problem. They are seen as someone who really are integral part of the process of developing this work. And many of the ideas could not have been generated without that input, but from the beginning. And I think they run hand in hand. And maybe one day me and Jane can do a chit-chat together.
Oh, that would be very good. But at the beginning, when you were talking about this issue of practice and your criticism of the word practice, I think the thing that's interesting about the office is that despite the obviously the whole kind of history of the office, that there actually when people go there, it's amazing the kind of some of them die, but I think that there is also incredible the devotion that is there in terms of how people are working and the whole nature of the office. So I think when I also ask you about when I'm asking you about when I'm asking you about collaboration, I'm also interested to find out whether you've done something in terms of the way that the office is organized, for example, which might be different from other offices. Are you actually trying to do something in terms of the organization of the office?
No, I think that the organization of the office does not really work per se. I think that I can't say it's kind of an ultimate system to work with. I think that what the office has, which is it's a very strange kind of a thin line between complete authoritarianism by myself and a complete freedom also given to the others. And I think that is if I was working there, I would find it interesting. But I don't find it interesting myself, because I think that running an office is not a fun thing to do. And you realize the minute you hire somebody, you are their slave. You're finished. It's true. As an individual, you are over because you are enslaved by them, as opposed to they're enslaved by you. But they will disagree with you on that. But I think that this kind of this combination of dogma imposed by me at times and freedom, it gives people who are very strong the ultimate experience. I may say so. To be able to actually, and I think that is a rare thing. And many people who come new to the office find it very chaotic, because anything goes. And on the other hand, they can't assess what cannot go. But it is seen as a team, and I think that people who are like Brian, Maya, Patrick, Brett, all the current members, from Woody to Marcus to Elizabeth to Oliver, Jan. There are people who, but I think that it is a group work, and I think that's why they put a lot of effort into it, because it's not just seen as my work. It is their work as much as it's my work, and I hope that is made quite clear. I have reserved my right of veto, which is a very a rare and privileged position. I can say no to things. They don't listen to me, believe me. But I think that it is important that people feel that they actually can bring idea to the table, and it is, I think, what gives it that at times richness that from different expertise can do that. The same with the consultants, and I think that Cardiff would not have been developed the way it did without also. For me, I have to say, the learning experience for me, and I always have to relate to what I have learned from all this, from working with really tremendous engineers and consultants, was that for me it was a learning experience, and that I can assess in advance where things are, because engineering and all, it is to the common sense, and that you can assess in advance what could work, what couldn't, but also it has taught me a great deal, which I wouldn't have thought would be the case.
Can I ask you my Millennium question?
You can ask me a Millennium question.
No, I think the other thing, the thing I was going to ask you about the Millennium project is that there is an interesting analogy with she can have a cigarette here, with the Festival of Britain. I mean, in a way, because I think that what was interesting about the Festival of Britain is that it was incredibly optimistic in terms of the whole idea of a certain kind of better future. And somehow it seems that maybe the current Millennium Dome might not be quite promising that kind of thing.
I mean, I thought about this a bit. I think that, in this country in particular, one aspect of intellectualism is to be negative. And I think it's very important to be critical. But I think that it doesn't help to have constantly negative critique of everything. And I think really, effectively, we have to really have ideas about how we can do things better or differently than just to criticize that something is not done properly. I can show the Millennium Dome eventually, but we are entwined, and we can't, because of copyright issues, we cannot really, there is an embargo and we cannot show it at this point in time, but I'm sure next week one can. And also because the ideas for that has not firm. My view about the dome is that this has been underway and is built a long time ago. This is another kind of found object, a found site. And if we think of the dome as a found site, but despite that, one has a different strategies how to deal with the entire organization of that space. What is interesting to me, how to deal with this very large mass of void, which is caught between the skin of the dome and the ground, and how you interpret the planning of that space. Now, I think that one can say there's a problem with the idea of doing right now, World's Fairs, or to do what kind of experience it should be. Whether one should just say, let's not touch it, let it kind of go, let it not happen. But I think it would be more interesting is to kind of really generate ideas, despite what they give you, which could be very confining as to how to deal with it. But I think also what is interesting is that what kind of life it could generate beyond the dome and that whole part of London, which I think in a way is more significant than the idea of the dome itself. But the ricochet effect of that space, the adjacency of that space to other sites, and what it can do to that whole part of London, I think is the part which is, for me, very, very interesting, in how to deal with moving this incredible amount of people to it and beyond. But I can't show it.
Anybody else? Anybody else's wonder?
No.
Thank you very much. Thank you.